Basic Education Minister Angie Motshekga is expected to make an announcement on the pass rate of last year's matrics later on today. Around 1 million candidates registered for the National Senior Certificate. The 2020 school calendar was mostly disrupted due to the COVID-19 pandemic and, of course, the lockdowns. Some homeschooling and learner support programs were implemented to assist students with their work. However, it was challenging and wasn't accessible to everybody. To reflect on last year's academic year, we are joined by Hopolang Selebalo, who is the head of research at Equal Education, as well as Lawrence Manaka. He's a matriculant at JB Matabane Secondary School in Gauteng. Great to have both of you. Thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you so much for having us on.
It's an absolute pleasure.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for both of your time. Hopolang, let me begin with you. So matrics obviously sat for their matrics in their exams in the most unprecedented times. How would you describe the academic year overall?
Maybe just to start off by saying that we wish the best of luck to the 2020 matric cohort, to Lawrence and his peers. We can only imagine the amount of work that teachers and learners had to pull off last year, and it was such an incredibly disruptive year. Which really amplified the inequalities that exist within our education system. We had the prolonged school closures at the beginning of the year last year when the COVID-19 pandemic first broke out. And there was a lot of uncertainty during that time in terms of how to support learners. And the inequalities then manifested when schools started reopening, and many under-resourced schools, particularly those between quintiles 1 and 3, couldn't reopen because they didn't have the adequate infrastructure to enable learners to go back to school. So you found that some schools or some matriculants didn't go back to school and had to learn from home, whereas those in well-off or better resource schools could in fact continue with their education. To top it all off, matriculants had to cover their entire curriculum. So the DBE wasn't willing to budge in terms of trimming the curriculum. The exam paper, we were told, had already been set. And then, of course, there was the end of last year where there were those matric paper leaks, and there was the threat of learners then possibly having to rewrite their physical sciences paper and their maths paper, which obviously led to the court case with teacher unions and the DBE. So it was an incredibly disruptive year, and I believe that whatever small strides we were making around the matric exams, with the pass rate, with the bachelor's passes, and I mean we do have a bit of contention with the matric exams, but those small wins that we're making will now be reversed with the disruption that COVID has brought about. And I'm sure Lawrence can speak well to what last year was like, the psychosocial and emotional effects of that year.
And that's a good note to bring Lawrence into the conversation, because Lawrence, I mean, obviously we can talk about it and analyze it and speculate as to what it was like, but you actually went through the whole process last year of doing matric through a global pandemic, and it was a very, very difficult year from what we all saw. But from what you experienced, tell us about that.
A very good morning, and thank you for having me here. You look at a picture that Hopolang is painting, and it is exactly what has been happening in our schools. But then when I try to give you what has been happening individually in our schools, you find out that it's a bit more. When we had to close down, and go home when the lockdown started, now there were questions arise that, are we even going to go back to school this year, and now the president and the minister decided that we can go back to school. And you understand that, when you were away, there are learners who do not have, access to textbooks. There are learners who do not have access to proper internet for them to be able to access, the materials that were made available for us while we were still at home. Now we have to go back to school. And going back to school, remember, we're going back to a whole new environment that we are all not used to. We're all still trying to adjust to that environment. And, you get there, you find that your school is not even in a place to accommodate you. And it's not because they don't have the PPE. The PPE is provided, but, the school itself is punished. It does not, meet the minimum norms and standards. Therefore, even if they sanitize or do whatever, the school is still not in a place to, to receive learners. But, anyway, you still have to learn in that very same school, knowing that, your health is at risk. That puts a lot of anxiety, you're thinking that I'm going to go there, I'm not going to come back. But then now you come to the curriculum side of things, the curriculum side of things, like I said, others do not even have textbooks. Now you have to go back to school. There's a gap between, your February and, the rest of, the year. You don't even know how you're going to close that gap because, well, you do not have anyone to help you at home, during that time to help you get better understanding of what was going on. And then you have to try and cover that gap in a short space of time. First week you go to school, there's a case identified, meaning that you have to close down the school. More time taken away from us. And you look at, the days that the DPE has put in front of us. The days is just, a patch up of, the real days. Because on a normal matric year, you will need to go to school probably from 6:30 to 6 p.m. in the evening, do your cross nights. But then, now that is not possible. So it just brings a lot of stress and anxiety all at the same time.
Yeah. I mean, it was, when you did finally go back to school and obviously the stress, the anxiety, can you tell us what it was like for colleagues? I mean, did you know of any of your fellow learners? Did anybody or teachers or anyone that you know of actually contract COVID while at school or going to school or perhaps not from school but around, and it obviously affected them as well, writing matric?
So our first case at school was actually Elena. They did not close down the school because Elena contracted, COVID-19 while Elena was away. But then the biggest one that hit us all at school was when, almost, the whole HOD staff had to go into quarantine. Now that crippled the school, massively for almost a week or 2 weeks or so without proper teaching and learning when, we had a lot of teachers who tested positive, some even, in ICU.
So, on top of everything, I know we've got a very bad connection with you, Lawrence, but it doesn't matter. We're going to keep on going because we really want to hear your story. But when you hear just a little bit, Hopolang, about what Lawrence and his friends went through during this year, it was a lot. It really, really was. From schools opening and closing, then seeing people going into ICU, perhaps some not coming back, then having to sit down and write an exam. And Lawrence, let me quickly ask you this, just as a question before I get to Hopolang. Did you manage to finish the school syllabus?
Well, we were able to finish the school syllabus, in other subjects, and you find that in other critical subjects that need more time, you just couldn't, try and cover up, everything. But then, at the end of the day, you still had to go and write because, well, the show had to go on.
Yeah, indeed. Now let's talk to that, Hopolang, because there's a lot of learners that were in that kind of position, going into exams, having not even finished the syllabus and then writing matric. Talk to us about that.
I'm sure it's going to have a bearing when the minister announces the pass rate this year. Over the last couple of years, she often speaks to the system on the rise, the traditional pass rate. We're at 79% pass rate or an 80% pass rate. But unfortunately, as Lawrence points out, many learners were unable to even get through the syllabus, and teachers have told us the same thing. And again, you'll find that this will likely happen in under-resourced schools that now had to open and close on a frequent basis because the infrastructure wasn't there to enable learners to be there full-time, or when learners were at home, they weren't able to study at home or learn at home because of the lack of textbooks that Lawrence is talking about, or internet access, or devices. And it's the likelihood is that it's going to create a gap, a bigger inequality gap within the quintiles in any case, which is something that we've always spoken about the inequalities within the public education system on its own. Another big factor that we're worried about is the dropout rate, which again, we've pointed out on a number of occasions. When the minister calculates, or when the DBE calculates the pass rate, they usually just reference the learners in matric that year that wrote. But when the actual case is one should be looking at the number of learners that started grade 2 together and that then write matric together. And you'll find that there's a big gap between those who started grade 2 and those who actually write matric and those who go on to pass matric. That the number is much less than the 80+% that is often touted by the minister. And it's likely going to look slightly not good this year. It's not going to look good this year.
If we look at the matric pass rate from 2019, I think we were sitting at 81.3%. That was the overall percentage of the pass rate. I mean, can we honestly expect that the 2020 matric results will be near that or over that? And I mean, you know, it's a difficult thing to ascertain because there are a lot of reasons as to why it wouldn't be at that. But I mean, do you have any expectations at this point?
As you say, it's quite difficult to ascertain, but the likelihood is that it will be slightly lower than that because of the disruptions of last year. What Lawrence and his peers were able to cover in terms of the curriculum, and of course, again, the multiple opening and closing and reopening of schools. But it's difficult to determine. It would be a surprise to find that it's the same, or even slightly above that. That would be quite a surprise.
You know, because it would actually be, it would be a surprise in a way, because, you know, when we talk about infrastructure and we talk about homeschooling, I mean, that had to be the order of the day for many, especially earlier in the year when the pandemic began and there was absolutely no access whatsoever into schools. You couldn't get there. And then they couldn't get their books. They couldn't get anything. As you heard Lawrence saying, we literally had to disappear overnight. Now, for those who actually did have access, A, was there enough support for the kind of programs that were introduced to assist them? And B, my question is, the access or lack of to the internet and online programs, especially for children that truly do not have that, for learners from disadvantaged communities that don't have computers, they don't have Wi-Fi, they don't have anything of that kind to help. So hence they sat for months without doing a thing. Let's look at those two scenarios.
I mean, remote learning can't replace traditional learning, you know, even if in instances where your teacher's teaching you via Zoom, it's different from like having face-to-face contact and asking questions in a classroom. But even in the case of remote learning, it's usually those learners in more, I guess, privileged or better resource schools that were able to do that consistently, possibly throughout the year. But as you point out, learners in under-resourced schools and perhaps under-resourced households weren't able to do that because of lack of ICT devices, you know, the internet access and so on. The Human Sciences Research Council has done a study about the kind of connectivity that learners, some households have to the kind of connectivity households have to devices and internet. And wealthier households are obviously well off in terms of books and internet and computers and so on. But under-resourced households really struggle. On top of that, school infrastructure doesn't even allow for teachers to have that kind of relationship with the learners, even if they wanted to. I mean, we have schools that are still struggling with access to electricity, for crying out loud, never mind access to the internet. And Lawrence is talking about even something as basic as a textbook. Like some learners didn't even have access to something as basic as a textbook or a workbook. And I remember at the beginning of last year, soon after the lockdown, the minister saying that she's unsure about whether or not all learners have received workbooks to accommodate them during the hard lockdown, even though that was a directive by the DBE that learners should access workbooks. But she was unclear whether or not that had actually happened for learners. Yeah. So for learners in quintile 1 to 3 schools in particular, the events of last year were incredibly difficult, and I'm sure to some degree will be detrimental.
Lawrence, I know that there was the Department of Education saying that 47 days all in all were lost, and to try and catch them up, there were camps in different provinces where people came together to try and catch up the work and work together and try and assist you, the class of 2020, as much as possible. Did this happen for you?
Unfortunately, we did not even know, the selection process from other schools. Well, as for my school, no camp, we did not go to camp at all, meaning that we had to try and, it was actually every man for himself, just us and our teachers, and us and maybe the resources that we have at home. And we did not even go to the camps. It was not a possibility for us.
I mean, Lawrence, obviously that was last year, this is this year. I mean, you didn't have the ability to write the June exams to prepare you for the end of the year exams. These were all written together at the end of the year, which is, again, is something that is very difficult and a lot of pressure on you. But what are your expectations? What are you hoping for? Have you applied to a university or a technikon, or do you know what your future holds for you, even though I know that today is a big day for you, or tomorrow whenever you get your results? How are you feeling?
Oh, well, I must say I'm a bit anxious, and like we are painting a picture here, it's been a milestone for us. So all I can do is just, be positive, because I know that I've tried my best and I've put in my best, whether I was under-resourced or not, I just did my best. And I know there are so many learners out there who also, did their best, and, they tried to cover on their own, even though, the department or, the resources were not in favor of them. So I can say that, I'm just hopeful that I did well, because, I know that I did try my best, to prep up, given the circumstances. So I'm just waiting, and I'm willing to accept whatever it is, because, at the end of the day, it's not, the end of the world. You can still go back, So I can say, I'm hoping. I'm just hoping. Fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed. Lawrence, I wish you the best of luck. All of us do, in fact. I will be waiting, and please let us know how you do, no matter how good, no matter how bad, because this is another year and another difficult year for matrics, because, whether we like it or not, the class of 2021 now are going through a lot, because they also lost a lot of days and time last year in grade 11. Now they're moving into matric with all the baggage as well. So, I mean, Hopolang, just talking to as we wrap this up and we go into news, what are your expectations for this class of 2021? This is also going to be very difficult with threats of third waves, opening, closing. What are you hoping for?
I can only imagine the anxieties of the class of 2021 as well. They also have the additional stress of carrying through a curriculum from last year, on top of learning the matric syllabus as well. And we just hope that teachers and the education system is able to catch them up as quickly as possible, and that there are as few disruptions to the system as possible. We've advocated for a long time that schools must reopen, but must reopen safely. But the more disruptions there are, the more detrimental it is for learners. So learners do need to be in classrooms to ensure that there's that contact with teachers, to ensure that teaching and learning time does actually take place. But it also says a lot about our need to improve ICT, our need to improve infrastructure, the need for the government to invest in the education system. Because off on a slight bit of a tangent here, is that you see money being taken away from infrastructure grants, from the basic education system, when what we need is money being put into the education system to ensure that learners are able to learn in safe environments, to ensure that learners are able to continue with their schooling, to ensure that learners are confident that they will have a positive future instead of being in limbo and dealing with all of these anxieties. And what's also very critical that I'd like to point out that Lawrence has already spoken to is the critical need for psychosocial support, because it's been an incredibly difficult year for all learners. And I think matric in particular is a very difficult year for learners generally, but more so now.
All right, we leave it there. Thanks to both of you. Hopolang Selebalo from Equal Education and Lawrence Manaka, good luck to you. A matriculant who sat for the exams last year. We're holding thumbs for you, and you're in our prayers as well, Lawrence, as you wait your results. So that ends up this interview, and of course that is our top story in the news, waiting for these results to be released later on this afternoon by the Minister. I'll hand it over to Sakina.